In this video, I'm going to give you a clearer and more confident understanding of what a LUT is. And I'm going to tell you the single biggest drawback of a LUT, as well as the single biggest benefit of a LUT. So let's dive right in and let's start with a simple definition of what a LUT is. Are you ready? Grab a pen. A LUT is a thing that does a thing. Does that sound ridiculous? It's a really broad but a really functional definition of what a LUT is. And any of us who've spent any amount of time in production or post-production probably know exactly what I mean when I say that, right? If we want to get a hands-on example, we can take a look here inside of Resolve. I'm going to go over here to the timeline section of my node graph, where I can create adjustments that are going to affect all the shots in my timeline. And I'm going to hit Option S to create a new serial node. And then I'm going to go in here to my LUTs and into my Film Looks subfolder. And I'm going to grab my trusty Rec. 709 Kodak 2383 LUT and apply it to this new node that I've just created. And we can see that my big fancy definition definitely holds, doesn't it? If I turn this off and on, this is doing a thing to my image. A LUT is a thing that does a thing. And you might think that my definition is kind of silly, but my question would be, what do I actually need to know about LUTs that isn't contained in that definition? A LUT is a thing that does a thing. It changes the appearance of my image. If I like the way the LUT changes my image, then I'll use it. And if I don't like it, then I won't use it. What else do I really need to know about LUTs? Well, it turns out there is a bit more detail to the way that LUTs work, that if we understand it, we're going to be more empowered to use LUTs in a better fashion and to more quickly and more consistently get great results out of a LUT, okay? So if I wanted to flesh out that definition just a little bit, here's what I would say. I would say something like a LUT is a lookup table. That's what LUT is short for. Literally a table of numbers, a table of values that takes your input and returns an output based on the numbers in that table. Kind of like a multiplication table. If you ever had a multiplication table when you were in grade school, you would take in an input, you would take in, 3 in your row and 4 in your column, and you would find your result by going to the appropriate row and column. A LUT works fundamentally in the same way. It takes an input, it looks up a value, and it returns an output. That's where we get the term lookup table from. And the reason why I flesh out the definition in that way is because it really leads us to the first point that I want to emphasize, the big drawback that I want to clarify in our video today, which is that LUTs are dumb. LUTs are just a big long list of numbers. That is it. LUTs have no awareness of image. LUTs don't know what a look is. LUTs don't know what a color space is. LUTs know nothing of your creative intent. They're just a big, dumb, long list of numbers. And that fact right there is the number one reason for all the confusion and all the frustration that can sometimes accompany conversations about LUTs. We simply don't realize that LUTs are dumb. And because LUTs are dumb, we have to be smart and we have to use LUTs in a manner consistent with their design intent. And if we look at this image here as a great example, the reason why this image looks completely insane is not because there's something wrong with this LUT, but because I am using it in a manner that is completely at odds with its design intent. And to put just a little bit more detail on that, the two key things that we need to know about any LUT before we go out there and use it in a project, we need to know what color space the LUT is set up to expect. That's always just going to be one color space. And we need to know what color space the LUT is set up to return. When we know those things and we use the LUT in a manner consistent with those color spaces, we can get good results, provided, of course, that the LUT is of high quality. When we don't know those things, when we just throw a LUT onto any image and see what comes back, we are asking for trouble. Sooner or later, we are going to get it. And this drawback that we're talking about right here, this loose or improper use of LUTs, or not understanding the fact that LUTs are dumb, so we need to be smart. This is at the very center of why we get problematic results when we use LUTs, why some people have suspicion or superstition surrounding LUTs. They simply don't understand that LUTs are dumb, so we need to be smart. But when you understand that, you can use a LUT consistent with the circumstance that you are trying to use it in, and you can get awesome results. That really leads me to the second point that I want to emphasize. LUTs can do things that Resolve's color page, the tools inside of Resolve's color page, cannot do. Let's take a look at an example of that. So let's wipe out this Kodak 2383 that we've got going on here, because it's not looking very good, is it? And instead, I'm going to go into my Voyager subfolder in here. This is inside of my CKC folder. And I'm going to go into my Pro Pack here. Now, this is an entire collection of LUTs whose input color space, whose expected input color space is DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate, and whose output color space is also DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate. That is perfectly consistent with my needs here in this project because I have set up my color management. I am working with DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate. And if I want to have a LUT that's going to slot well into that system, that's exactly what I need. So I've got the right set of LUTs picked out that I'm going to be using here. And let's take a look at what we can do when we've selected the right LUTs for the job. I'm going to go over here into my tone folder and I'm going to grab a foundation. Just going to flip through a couple until I find one that I like. And then from here, I'm going to prepend a serial node and I'm going to go to a modifier and find something that's going to give me a bit more color contrast in my image. Maybe something like this. Okay. Now we're going to go into our palette side. I'm going to go to my palette foundation and select Mars, like so. And finally, I'm going to prepend one more node. I'm hitting Shift S, by the way, to prepend these nodes. And I'm going to go into my modifiers for my palette, and I'm going to select Hyperion as my palette modifier. And if I clean up this node graph a little bit, I'm now applying this to all of the images in my timeline. And I might want to go back over to my original contrast node, or my contrast LUT, I should say, and back things off a little bit. Maybe back things off a little bit in my palette modifier and palette foundation as well. All I'm doing when I adjust this key output gain is scaling the intensity of the effect that the LUT is having. And in fact, I'm liking scaling the intensity of all 4 ingredients just a little bit. But I want you to see here, as I land on any one of these images, I'm doing aesthetically interesting things. Maybe you don't like the look, but I really dig what's happening here. But what's most important is that these things that are happening are quite complex, but they're happening quite cleanly. And they are happening on an automatic basis across all of the shots in my timeline and helping me get to an aesthetically pleasing result, to a really good macro level creative transform or a look really, really quickly. So this is the big upside, the big benefit of LUTs is that they can cleanly and quickly do things that the tools inside of Resolve's color page simply cannot, which makes them an ideal candidate for the implementation of an overall look for our project. So I hope that gives you a bit more of a specific sense of what a LUT is and what its biggest drawback is, as well as its biggest benefit, and of how you can use a LUT in a more empowered and confident context because you understand the way LUTs work, what they actually are, and where they are suited and where they are not suited to our needs as colorists when we're working inside of DaVinci Resolve.